summer of 2010, my parents came up to visit me in Manhattan with my little brother and my little sister, where I was living at the time. We were getting lunch, but although four of them came to visit, only three of them were actually present. My little brother had developed an addiction to computer games, and he spent the entire lunch on my mom's iPhone. And that meant he's pretty fucking good at some computer games. This is from the 2011 Delaware State Chess Championships for college kids, and he's the white player. He's about to checkmate that motherfucker and take the championship for the second year in a row. He was the master of the finite state of the computer's memory, but in the real world, things weren't going so well for him. 15-hour-a-day computer habit, his grades were dropping, and he was becoming more and more isolated. And it all came to a head when he flunked out of school. My parents made him go out to get a job, but we found out that he didn't go to find a job. He parked his car, climbed in the back seat, and shot himself in the temple. When I came home, my brother's suicide was the arc of every story, the center of every conversation, and it was the white space that surrounded me in every room. If my 5-minute presentation on suicide makes you uncomfortable, try being a suicide survivor for the rest of your life. Each member of my family had their own way of coping, but for me, I'm a data scientist, and I delved into statistics and psychology. Did you know that in the developed world, suicide is now the leading cause of death of young people, and no one's talking about it? Every year, suicide takes the lives of 40,000 people in America and 800,000 people globally. That's a suicide every 10 minutes in America. What's more, there's even more suicide attempts. Each year, 1 million people attempt suicide in America. That's a suicide every minute of every day for a year, and that's 2 suicide attempts nationally since I started my presentation here in Ignite Boulder. Men are at more risk than women, poor men are at more risk than rich men, Caucasians are at more risk than Latinos and blacks. Among gay and lesbian youth, the amount of suicide risk correlates with the amount of rejection that they feel from their family. So, what is it about depression and anxiety, where people will take their own lives? Turns out there's a theory of suicide that defines 3 overlapping conditions where people will make an attempt at self-harm. The first is called thwarted belongingness. It's just sort of like a fancy name for loneliness. The second is called perceived burdensomeness. It's like, if you see yourself as an effective provider for yourself and those around you, then you maintain the will to live, and if you don't, then you get the idea. And the third is fearlessness. It's sort of like the warped courage or lack of empathy for oneself it would take to take your own life. So, coming back to my story, we couldn't reach my brother because he developed a propensity towards isolationism that was reinforced by his escapism and this sort of cliche vicious cycle thing. His tool for escapism was computer gaming, but we all know other people who have other tools for escapism like alcohol, drugs, sex, gambling, the internet. So when I think about this platform that I've been given tonight, what message can I leave you with now that I understand the statistics and psychology of suicide? I mean, statistically, only 1 in 5 of you will ever be suicide survivors, but should we have a conversation about escapism and how damaging that can be? Or is this a talk about evolution? I mean, does nature optimize for the survival of a species and not for the happiness of individuals? And on top of that, how different is the world now from the world in which we evolved? Or is this a conversation about the circumstances of existence? If inescapable physical or mental pain is the first dart of existence, what are we to make of the second darts that we throw at ourselves? Are inescapable anxiety, self-doubt, and self-criticism worse than those first darts? Or is it just plainly a story about my brother, a normal guy who's kind of depressed and a little bit frumpy looking, but is a genius? I mean, he's 98th percentile nationally in chess and #1 in the state of Delaware for 2 years in a row. There's gotta be a way that people like that can live in society. Or is this about the pathology of modern society? We all have this imperfect representation of the world in our minds, and it's increasingly colored by these digital devices in our pockets and on our desks and on our wrists. How is that affecting us? Or is this an affirmation of life, about the kind of people who are mad to live and mad to talk and desirous of everything at the same time? The kind of people who would never yawn or say a commonplace thing, or would burn, burn, burn like candles across the sky, and in the middle you see the blue center light pop. I know what it's about for me. Stigma in mental illness has a long history, and you don't have to look back long to see a time when the diagnosis of mental illness meant you'd be locked up for life, and that's too bad because loneliness is a risk factor for suicide. So hear me, Ignite Boulder. I will not stand in fear of what people think of my family or my brother, and I will stand with compassion with those who need help. My ask for you, reevaluate the relationships that you have with the isolated, depressed, or mentally ill people in your lives. It could mean the world to them. Thank you.